What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and this one I'm going to be breaking down what's going on with Tesla stock and what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely massive day for the entire stock market as I talk about SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and Tesla, and many other tickers based off their technicals and based off their earnings coming out for tomorrow. Also, Tesla has earnings for tomorrow, so it's going to be very impactful for the share price. So I'm going to break down how this could affect it as it approaches earnings and what could end up happening afterwards later on in the video. But before I break anything down about all of this information and talk about Tesla's earnings, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, and then it could be a free Tesla share. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Tesla was up 1.02% for the day, and this thing ended up pumping to about this 295 level, which was my target for Tesla approaching earnings. I told you we are going to likely reach around 295 to 300, but specifically around 295 at the latest, or at the very least. And that's where Tesla ended up going to. So we actually reached that level. Tesla's looking quite nice so far, and we have a very, very big day for tomorrow as Tesla has earnings after the market closes. Now, I will talk more about Tesla a little bit later on in the video, but let me first talk about the market very briefly. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick as well. So for SPY, I just want to mention that from the technicals, this thing was not looking that great yesterday as we had some bearish signals developing and we had this potential and possible head and shoulder structure, right? But I told you guys during the pre-market that if we ended up breaking above 451, there was a chance we could end up invalidating it. And if we broke below 450, we could have just continued to maintain this level. Now, with that said, sometimes things are unexpected in the markets because we got so much bullish news from Goldman Sachs and many of these banks. I'm going to break down what the bullish news was that caused the market to pump. And you can't always foresee all of this news on a perfect basis because we had these bearish signals that developed, right? We had this bearish divergence and all these other things suggested the market had some pulling back to do. And we ended up pulling back just a little bit during the pre-market. But then after that, all the bullish news came out, and this ended up trumping all of these indicators and ended up just causing the market to rip to the upside and squeeze. But I warned you guys about this later on during the day as well. So yes, once again, guys, I'm a human. I can't always be correct. Sometimes I make mistakes as well. I can't always foresee the news that comes out, as it was very bullish today. But I am also quite right about many predictions as well, such as my prediction, for Tesla to reach 295, and that's what ended up happening. So, like I said before, I'm not always perfect, but I have been right about some predictions, and it's worth mentioning at least both sides. Now, anyways, let's talk about the market. Why did the market pump the way it did? I'm going to go kind of fast through this. Goldman Sachs was saying that the odds of a recession are unlikely. I mentioned this in the morning as well, and this is helping to bring in more and more positive sentiment as the chief economists that came out from their research are suggesting that the economy is stronger than expected. To add on to this, the earnings are expected to decline for Q2, according to the research as well from many economists, and we're expecting to see more declines of over 8.8%. Now, this could be good and bad for the markets. What's good about this is if we're expecting very bad earnings and they end up being better than expected, the market could still pump on that. But if earnings are truly as bad as what we're expecting, this could also cause some downside. Overall, earnings have been quite mixed, but a little bit better than worse, if anything. But I'm going to break down what just came out a couple of minutes ago, why it's not that great compared to what we saw earlier today. Now, just as a reminder, I want to remind you all that Microsoft also came out with some bullish news, which helped the AI sector even more. This is not the only thing that affected AI, of course, but this did play a big role in it. They have a new AI-powered feature for Office documents, and they're going to be charging for it to bring in more revenue. This helped Microsoft break an all-time high and continue to pump, which helped the entire tech sector even more as other AI stocks got the benefit of this going forward. This was some good news that came out. But now I want to talk about for tomorrow. Now, going forward, okay, we had some earnings that came out just a couple of minutes ago for today, like Interactive Brokers and just a couple of others like Western Alliance. But for tomorrow morning, we have Goldman Sachs, we have ASML, we have more banks, we have the NASDAQ and Ally Bank all reporting earnings before the market opens. That's going to be very impactful, especially Goldman Sachs tomorrow morning. But remember, I told you guys that Goldman Sachs came out today and they're saying that, oh, the odds of a recession are unlikely, things are looking quite good in the economy. And I'm wondering if they have very bad earnings that are coming out, why would they say something like this? Could they be trying to trick us? Or could it be that the odds favor them doing relatively well for earnings and they have a good outlook for what's about to come? because they're saying that the odds of a recession are unlikely. Their outlook and guidance should be relatively strong because of that. All right, so that's what I'm seeing for Goldman Sachs. Things are looking pretty good for them. I think they're going to help the market a little bit by the time we open, but I'm not too sure about Nasdaq and Ally Bank. But then after that's tomorrow when the market closes. Okay, we have Tesla reporting earnings, we have Netflix, United, and IBM, and many other companies out there. This is going to be very, very huge, especially Tesla, because they're the biggest company so far, one of the biggest to be reporting earnings this early. And they're going to be kicking it off for big tech very soon as well. This is going to be so massive. I can't wait for what Tesla's going to give us. I'm going to break down some important things about what economists are saying about it in just a couple of minutes. Now, let me just remind you all that we also have some building permits data 1 hour before the market opens. That's the only piece of data that's worth mentioning. But other than that, there's not really much else to talk about in terms of data. It's more just about earnings. Now, for earnings for today, because I mentioned to you guys after the market closed today, we had some earnings, and they were actually not looking too good. Interactive Brokers ended up dropping 2.6% because they missed on EPS. Omnicrom Group, they ended up actually dropping 5% as well, missing on their second quarter revenue, and they ended up beating on EPS, which is pretty interesting, but very mixed for them too. JP Hunt Transport Services ended up declining 1.1%, missing on EPS, and revenue was just okay. And last but not least, Western Alliance, they also dropped 5%, missing on EPS, but the revenue was a beat overall. So very mixed and somewhat bad earnings came out after the market closed today. But what's good about this is these are just small companies, nothing too insane compared to like a Tesla or compared to like a Goldman Sachs. So they may cause the market to decline a little bit by the time we open tomorrow, but then Goldman Sachs is going to be on the radar after that and many of these other big companies. And I think they're going to have a bigger impact by the time we open. And then the biggest impact for Wednesday by the time the market like closes, approaching the close and then going into after close is going to be Tesla, Netflix, and IBM, the three big ones. Make sure you are ready for all of this. Now, anyways, when it comes to Tesla, how are things looking so far? How is the outlook looking? Well, there's a very important interview with the finance automotive reporter. His name is Pras Subramania. I think I may have said that right or wrong, but anyways, basically he came out and said some very important things. He mentioned that it's very important to look at what Tesla is doing moving forward, look at the margins for the Cybertruck, and etc. He talked about how there's a lot of production capabilities for Tesla. We're going to be seeing a big amount of growth for them, with the capacity reaching 2 to 2.5 million for the year. And we're going to be watching some more gigafactories to come because they need a lot more to meet their goal of 20 million units by the end of the decade. Now, could Tesla meet that? It's a possibility. It's going to be difficult, but it is a possibility, and this will push them to do well nonetheless. To add on to this, we're going to learn more about some talks about like France and India, new gigafactories, which is very important, and other important things about the Cybertruck. I think that's going to be the center of attention, which is going to be very good. And finally, we're going to learn more about the competition side of it. How is it looking for competition? How is Tesla doing with all of this happening? And how are their margins going to be looking with all these price cuts? Those are some of the most important things. As far as their earnings go for expectations, we're expecting some pretty good stuff. I believe Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan came out. They both said that they want a beat in EPS. JP Morgan analysts were saying they want a 6% beat in EPS. And we are predicting, this is what Wall Street's predicting, a $24.9 billion amount in revenue, which is about 50% higher than a year ago, or almost at that level. They're expecting a beat in revenue and some good EPSs for Tesla. So expectations for this company tend to be high. Even if Tesla beats some expectations, it's not always enough for them to really, really pump, because remember, with high expectations, it could be more difficult for Tesla to meet them, even if Tesla does very well. And that could have a negative effect on the share price. That's why it's very important to be open-minded no matter what happens. But the biggest thing that's on everyone's minds and everyone's radars are going to be the margins. How is Tesla doing? Okay. We saw about like a 19% margin not too long ago, going back in time during the last like quarter, and we're likely going to see a bigger decline in it. Is it going to be like 16%, 18%? We'll just have to wait and see. If that's the case, and if they do end up saying something like that, let's see how Wall Street reacts to this. Let's see what Tesla says about their guidance. Will they continue to maintain margins like this, or will they continue to improve? I'm not sure. Tesla could go either way. It depends on their overall forecasts and what they're saying about the recession coming and things like that. Wells Fargo and Wedbush are predicting a 17.5% margin for them for gross margins to drop that much. So we'll have to wait and see on that. If that's the case, we have to be very careful. If it's lower than that, that's not going to be good. So we have to be very, very careful looking at earnings. It is quite risky and in some regards. So just be careful, guys. Besides that, those are some of the main things for it. Looking forward, looking at Tesla's current inventory levels, things are looking pretty good so far because if you look at the Model X, it's starting to drop even more, but it's starting to go up for the Model S, the Model Y, and the Model 3 just a little bit. But overall, they're at these relatively low levels compared to like times like before or even going into like the month of May. So it's not that bad. I'm becoming a little bit more concerned about the Model S. It is going a little bit higher, so let's watch this one very carefully. But besides that, everything else is quite decent. Now, what's good about Tesla is we have a volume of about 112 million. That's once again above what we got a couple of days ago at the like 90 million mark. Tesla was also declining in the morning as the market was kind of slow to start us off on the tech side before it started to really improve over time. So much of that volume was a lot of added buying pressure and algos taking over because of some bullish triggers that ended up coming from the news. Now, to add on to this, the overall short volume has been going up just a tiny bit on Tesla at about 65 million. So we are starting to see more shorting. Could this lead to a more bigger short squeeze, or will it lead to more downside? We're just gonna have to wait and see. The price price ratio is quite high for Tesla. Tesla's outperforming the market and holding up quite nicely. And Morgan Stanley came out just 2 days ago and they're saying that Tesla's going to perform equally with the markets. Wells Fargo said the same thing. And Wedbush is saying that Tesla's going to outperform the market, which is once again quite bullish. Besides that, Tesla tends to be green about uh, 48% of the time on Wednesdays. I don't really think this matters that much though, because it's we're approaching earnings. That doesn't matter that much. The fourth hour tends to be very strong for Tesla, especially today. If you guys were watching during the fourth hour, it really pumped. And we saw a slight increase in the short interest at about 36 million shares shorted. And once the data updates by tomorrow, we're going to find out how this is looking. I will update you guys on how it's looking by the time the data comes out. For now, things are looking pretty decent for Tesla. And here's what I see happening moving forward. So for Tesla, okay, we may see the market slow down a little bit in the morning because of these negative earnings that came out from the banks so far and other marketing companies for today after the market closed. But then Goldman Sachs will affect it moving forward. Tesla may gap down a little bit tomorrow, come down maybe close to like this 292 area. But I think it's going to try to hold up for the majority of the day. And then I think it's going to get one more attempt to pump. It's going to try to retest 292. And if that breaks, watch 295 or so. Could we break 295? If that were to happen, then there's a good chance it's going to go for that 300. But just be very careful because historically, what tends to happen to Tesla approaching earnings is typically it pumps very hard on like the Mondays, the Tuesdays, the weeks before. Then on the day of earnings, it tends to not pump as hard. It could pump. I mean, it's still a possibility, but it tends to not be as crazy because when you zoom out, much of the pumping already happened, right? We've been watching this thing pump since this thing was around this 265 area just a couple of days ago. About a week ago, exactly 1 week ago, Tesla was at 266. Now it's at 295. So it already pumps so much. The remaining amount for it to pump is not that big or significant compared to how much it pumped before. So maybe it's going to pump just a tiny bit. I'm going to be watching 295 if it could break this. If it does break it, I'm going to be watching 300. My gut tells me it may try to get to 300, but once again, most of the pumping has been done. I called 295 many weeks ago, and I think it could get very close to 300, but then that's not really what's going to matter as much to me. What's going to matter more is, okay, we're already at these high levels. Could we keep going after earnings? Are we about to get a big rug pull? I'm not sure. I'm going to be very careful with those margins. We have to be very, very conscientious and listen very carefully to what Elon Musk or any of their other employees end up saying. So watch this all very carefully. I have a feeling, and what my prediction is we may see Tesla gap down in the morning, cool off just a tiny bit, then try pumping later on intraday and retest once again 292, then potentially 295. If 295 breaks, we could see 300. If it fails to do so, then it is what it is. It may just like trade sideways until we approach earnings, because generally, like I said before, most of the pumping happens beforehand, and the day before earnings or like the day during earnings, we tend to see the stock just trade kind of sideways, not as strong. That's what generally happens to Tesla. So I'll be waiting and seeing. I mean, I have a feeling it's going to try to test 295, maybe try to get to 300. We'll have to wait and see, but that's just nothing compared to how much we pumped already, right? That's just a tiny like 1.5 to 2% move compared to like this thing being up, more than 10% compared to where it was before. So just wanted to note that we could see some upside, maybe some sideways price action, some upside for tomorrow, and we will wait and see what happens after earnings is going to be very, very huge. Now, for SPY, I just want to mention that this thing was looking very strong today, getting a very, very big push to the upside and validating some bearish signals. And we're going to be watching this resistance at 455 for tomorrow. And then if it breaks that, there's 456. For downside, you're going to be watching the support right over here around this 453.5 area, then 452.69, then 452 flat. My gut tells me it's going to gap down a little bit, get very close to this 453 zone, then try to bounce after that, and just trade kind of sideways as the day goes on, depending on earnings and the news that comes out. But I'm seeing a very sideways day tomorrow. I don't think it's going to break out super hard. Unless we break 455, then yes, we're going to be pushing all the way up to like 456 and potentially 457.8. But it depends on if we could get the breakout or not. I'm anticipating more sideways price action, if anything. I think I forgot to mention my levels on Tesla, by the way. So if Tesla were to break down, just hypothetically, right, there's support at 292, 290, 288.5, and 286.5 on Tesla, followed by 286. If it breaks below 290, you're going to be watching 288 and 286 as our supports. If it breaks above 295, it could push all the way up to 300 at that point. But like I said before, the upside is not going to be that significant compared to what we saw from beforehand. So sorry for forgetting to mention this. These are some important levels as well. I'm anticipating another attempt to push up, but like I said before, I'm not considering this like the big move. It already made the big move, and we're just gonna have to wait on earnings. Anyways, for Apple, it's looking very sideways to me. If you're bullish, you want to see it break 194. If you're bearish, you want to see it break below 192. What do I think is gonna happen? Well, I think it's very sideways, not really picking a direction. It's been stuck like this for a couple of days. We're likely gonna see this thing decline to 192, try to bounce off of that after the pre-market, and just trade very sideways again. For the triple Q, if you're bullish, you want to see it break above 387. If it does so, it's going to get very close to 390. If you're bearish, you want to see it break below 384. If that's the case, it's going to come all the way down to about 382. What do I think is more likely? I think it's going to decline in the pre-market, come down to this 384 level and try to bounce. And it's going to likely just trade kind of sideways, maybe push up a little bit thanks to Tesla and a couple of others out there. But I think it's going to close a little bit flat, maybe a tiny bit green. It's still very possible. And then we're going to get a big reaction after Netflix, IBM, and Tesla report their earnings. For Nvda, I told you all I have a target of $500 by the time we approach August at the very least, and it's getting closer to it. But there's a chance it's going to decline a little bit in the pre-market, make its way down to this like 470 area and just try to hold around there. But then it's going to try to bounce likely by the time we open tomorrow. And we have this nice accumulation that has been forming on it. With that said, the trend is still looking quite bullish overall. So there's a good chance it's going to be fighting for 480 for tomorrow. So maybe it drops a little bit, then tries to push up for about 480 or so, get very close to it. Either trades kind of sideways between 475 to 480 initially, or just straight up just breaks 480. It's got to be one of those two. If it breaks it, this thing's going to be well on its way to 485 plus. For Microsoft, if you're bullish on this thing, you want to see it break all the way up to this high right over here around 366. If you're really, really bullish, if you're bearish, you want to see it come all the way down to this imbalance. Instead, what I'm going to do, however, is just watch these levels. I think on the 15-minute time frame, you could see them a lot better. So we have support at 355. If that fails, it's going to come all the way down to about 350, then 348. For resistance, you want to see this thing get above, once again, our 364 resistance. And to be really bullish, you need to, once again, break the all-time high again. So these are some resistance levels. What do I think is more likely? In my opinion, it's looking a little bit more bearish from a technical standpoint. It may try to bounce in the morning and start declining a bit. We have this imbalance up here. So I'm going to be watching for a test of 364, then a rejection. I think it may start to cool off a little bit more because this trend is looking a little bit weak. And we could be seeing a test of 355 or so. It may drop a little bit lower because once again, it pumps super hard. And we have this imbalance down here. Generally, stocks slow down a little bit after pumping very hard like this. If you guys were watching like Coinbase, for example, they need to cool off just a little bit very naturally. And I'm calling out Coinbase because Coinbase did something very similar just a couple of trading days ago. Looking at AMD, I think there's something very similar is going on to like Nvda. This thing is forming a nice inverse head and shoulders, a nice cup and handle like structure. And I think it's going to try to make an attempt for $18 very soon. If it breaks it, a clean break above the 18s, it's going to push all the way up to 120. If it gets above 120, it's going to likely start flying up for 125 soon for the imbalance fills. Now, do I think that's going to happen immediately? I think it may decline first to 116 or so first before it tries to bounce, but I'm leaning more in that direction. For Netflix, if you're bullish tomorrow, it's going to likely try to make its way up to like 485. And if it holds these levels and it continues to pump after earnings, because Netflix has earnings very close to the time Tesla has it, it could go into the 500s. If they do bad, and or something bad happens with their margins, there's bad news when it comes to subscribers, or anything like that, This thing could come all the way down to this 465 area, if not all the way down to 450 or even lower levels for a big drop. These stocks move very big during the earnings reports, so just be ready for that. What do I think is very likely? I think it may try to pump a little bit more for the 480s. It was holding it very nicely today, but it may cool off later on as the time goes on, and we might see it start to decline after getting one more pop. It may decline a little bit, trade kind of sideways, and we're going to see a big move afterwards. We have nice support right now at around this 475 area. That's going to try to act as support. If that fails us, 470, 465, then 462, 460 are going to be our supports. I think it's going to try to pop a little bit more, cool off as the day goes on, then get a very big reaction after earnings. The Nasdaq is looking bullish right now, getting a very, very nice bullish looking structure, making higher highs and higher lows. There's no confirmation of the trend breaking, but I could see this thing gap down a bit, maybe cool off and bounce off the 50 EMA, which is going to be higher by tomorrow morning. I think it's going to gap down and try to bounce. That's what I'm leaning towards for tomorrow. Same thing with SPX. I think it's going to gap down tomorrow and try to bounce. Just looking at this trend, it pumped very hard. It also gapped down today, or it kind of cooled off today before bouncing. It didn't really gap down. I think tomorrow we might see it gap down a little bit, drop just a tiny bit, and try to bounce and once again trade kind of sideways. It could still pump a lot more if we get some very strong earnings, especially from Goldman Sachs. So just be ready for that. The dollar is pretty flat. If the dollar breaks out, it's going to be bearish. It's just trading sideways between 99.5 and about 100 right now, going back and forth and back and forth. So we will see if we get a break in any direction. Once again, we're still waiting for it. For Coinbase, it came down to 101. If you're bearish, you're going to be watching a retest of 101. If you're bullish, you want to see it make its way up to 110. It is looking relatively weak right now, but it's very stationary. So I'm going to be watching 101 support. I think it's going to retest that tomorrow. If it breaks below it, you're going to be watching 197.5. My gut tells me it's very flat and very stationary, so it may not make a very big move. It may remain in this trend going forward, not really doing anything big. From a technical standpoint, okay, just based off technicals, this is looking bearish on Google because we're getting this nice curl that's forming. We had a head and shoulders like structure, and we have this imbalance down here around this 121 area. So getting that bounce is very nicely off 123. That was the level I was talking about yesterday. If it breaks below 123, watch 121. If you want to be bullish, it could try to make its way back up to this other imbalance at about this 124 area. So could this thing be forming like a cup and handle, make its way up to 125? That's another possibility, but the overall trend is looking a little bit weak. So I'm going to be watching how it reacts. Which way does it break? Does it break below 123? If so, it's going to be bearish. If it breaks above above this like high right over here, above the 50 EMA at 124, we could get very close to 125.5 to 126. I'm in the middle in a way, but it is looking a little bit more bearish from the bigger trend. So it could try to like bounce a little bit tomorrow and start like downtrending even more because it's continuing to make lower highs and lower lows. There's not a true confirmation of it breaking just yet. So I'm going to be watching for a small bounce, maybe a cool off as time goes on, or a retest of 123. And if it does break below it, then that imbalance is still down there. For Amazon, there's a head and shoulders like structure that developed right over here and is continuing to decline. I'm watching to see how it reacts to 131.5 because on the 4-hour time frame we have the 50 EMA right about there. I was watching this 131.5. I think Amazon's going to test this, and we're going to see if Amazon bounces or not. If it breaks below that, it's going to start sinking down, and it's going to start coming down to like 130, 127.5, 128. Those zones down there, and potentially even 126. If we break below the 50 EMA and we start declining, we fail to get a bounce. If we bounce off of it, it could make its way back up to 134. So this is a very important test for Amazon for tomorrow. We'll see what it does. Watch that very carefully. And then for Meta, this thing is holding up nicely in my opinion, but it is declining on the 4-hour time frame. Now, is it technically making lower highs and lower lows? Technically, it's still on that trend, so we could see this decline a little bit in the morning, retest 307. But if it tries to bounce and establish a higher low, because sometimes it does this spontaneously, it might try to start pushing because there is a possible inverse head and shoulders that's developing. So 307 is your key area. If it breaks below 307, it's going to come down to 303. If it touches 307 and bounces, it has the potential to form this inverse head and shoulders structure and make its way all the way up to 316. So we're going to be watching 307 on Meta. Does it bounce off of it or does it break down? That's a very important level in my opinion. All right, guys, so that's what I have for this video. Tesla's going to be very big for tomorrow. I'm anticipating a possibility of it trying to retest 295 and possibly even 300 if it breaks it, but I'm not counting on that to be the bigger move. Like I said before, we already made the big move. So watch it carefully and see how it moves. Get ready for earnings. It's going to be the biggest thing of the week, in my opinion. And we're going to see a very, very big move for Tesla. So get ready for it. It's going to be a massive day. And until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Tesla to the moon because the long term is still incredibly bright. And peace out.